What's up, fellas? We are finally here. You have made it to the Fantasy Football Championship. Congratulations, but you still got one more win to go. And in today's video, we are going to be bringing you the final Week 17 matchups that matter, where we go through everything that you guys need to know to set your fantasy football lineups, over-unders, implied totals, fast-paced games, where the sharps are betting, matchups for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. All right, you guys know the drill at this point in the season. Write down your start-sit decisions. Write down Joe Flacco versus Bryce Young, which is one of the ones that I have this week in my championship matchup, and go, points for each guy as we go through this, and that will help you make the most informed decision possible. And of course, our weekly rankings, this matchup information is all free for championship week. That will be linked down below in the description, as well as in the pinned comment if you want to check it out. But let's get things kicked off with the over-unders for the Week 17 slate. You guys can see them all on the screen there. The Dallas Cowboys versus the Lions is the highest over-under on the slate, 53.5-point over-under. Definitely a couple sizzlers this week, the 49ers and Commanders, the Eagles and Cardinals, the Ravens and Dolphins, Vikings and Packers. Those games make up all of the point totals that are over 45 points. So a couple high-scoring ones this week. The Jets-Browns on Thursday Night Football tonight is the lowest-scoring game on the week. Then we also have the Broncos-Chargers, the Jaguars-Panthers, the Bears-Falcons. Those make up the games below 40-point over-unders. It's interesting to look at this because, of course, all summer we were talking about these Week 17 matchups from a best ball perspective, so it is finally cool to see the exact point totals that they end up becoming. And of course, too, if you guys missed it, Danny actually advanced the team to the Best Ball Mania Finals, so we will be feeling good that 6 of his 18 players are coming from that Lions and Cowboys game. Of course, that is pretty chalky, but he does have a lot of players from that game. So when we get into the implied point totals, these are individual team offenses totals here. The 49ers, the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Ravens, and the Rams are the highest point totals on the week. As expected, I mean, those are good offenses, but Vegas is also showing some lesser-known offenses some love this week with the Minnesota Vikings, the Houston Texans, which I would assume means that C.J. Stroud is expected to play, Indianapolis Colts, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, all projected for over 23 points each. So if you have some lesser-known start-sit decisions and you want to attack some teams that should put up some points, and Cowboys, Eagles, and all that kind of stuff, these teams could be ones to target. Steer clear of players from the Jets, from the Patriots, from the Panthers, from the Chargers, and the Falcons if possible. Of course, in my start-sit decision, Joe Flacco versus Bryce Young, Cleveland projected for 21 points versus Carolina projected for 15.75 points. That would be a point in Joe Flacco's favor. And in terms of where the sharps are betting, so we have the point totals, the over-unders. Which ones are the sharps thinking are overpriced or underpriced? This can give us some good information on some of the games we absolutely want to avoid. I usually use this as a disqualifier. If an already low game is catching steam on the under, you want to avoid that game, and vice versa. If a already high-scoring game is catching steam on the over, you want to attack that game. So Jets, Panthers, Broncos, Chargers, and Browns, Jets, already low totals, catching steam on the under. So that is a point against both of my quarterbacks, Bryce Young and Joe Flacco. Not great for my situation here, but of course, if I had Justin Herbert or Kirk Cousins, we wouldn't be talking about this right now. Be careful of potential trap games too, as well. The Eagles and Cardinals and Ravens and Dolphins games, potentially, sharps seem to think those games might be trap spots despite their high point totals over 47 points. We are expecting some of these games here in the sharps on the over to produce fireworks. Expected for the Commanders-49ers game, already a high total and catching a lot of steam on the over. 99% of the money out there. Cowboys and Lions, again, already a very, very high total at 53.5, catching steam on the over. Definitely do not sleep on games like the Giants-Rams, Vikings-Packers. Those games are really starting to check some boxes, so feel good if you have to decide between some of the players in those games. And then a lot of other interesting spots here as well with the Buccaneers-Saints, the Texans and Titans, and even the Kansas City Chiefs and Cincinnati Bengals, all projected to produce pretty decent point totals. I'm expecting Week 17 to be a pretty high-scoring week, so excited to see kind of what happens in championship round here. So getting into the advanced data points, these are things like pace of play. Of course, faster paced games means more offensive plays, means more fantasy production. Some of the faster paced games on the slate, we have a trifecta alert for the Cowboys and Lions. It's a high game total. The Sharps are on the over, and it's the fastest paced game on the slate. If you have Lions, if you have Cowboys, you got to put them in your lineup. And I'm not just talking about Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta and, Amon-Ra St. Brown and the two quarterbacks. They're pretty much every week starters for the most part. I'm talking about if you're screwed and you need to decide between like Jake Ferguson and somebody else at tight end, you probably want to lean with Ferguson. If you're trying to decide between Brandon Cooks and somebody else at wide receiver, you probably want to lean with Brandon Cooks. If you're absolutely desperate and you got to throw Jameson Williams in there, it's not a terrible week to do so. So other games that project pretty well are the Buccaneers and Saints, already decent high totals, sneaky trifecta as well with the high pace of play. Same goes for the Raiders at Colts, also a pretty decent game total there and projecting well in terms of pace of play. So again, sneaky games that you can target in case you're deciding between players from those games. And then offensive DVOA versus defensive DVOA, we want to look at the matchup advantages. How good are the opposing offenses going up against these defenses? The 49ers annihilating the competition in this category with their advantage. They're the best passing offense and overall offense in the NFL, going up against a bottom two defense. So RIP to those of you guys that play against Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, or George Kittle, because this offense could absolutely hang 40 and not even play in the fourth quarter in this game. They could kill the Commanders that bad. So good luck to those of you guys that play against them. And of course, as a Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle manager in my championship matchup, I feel very, very good about that. Same goes for the Philadelphia Eagles. Very high advantage, 27% for them. Just a smash spot against the Cardinals pass defense. They've been so bad against both the pass and against the run, which bodes well for Jalen Hurts, DeAndre Swift, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. Bounce back spots here for the Chargers, for the Broncos, and the Jags potentially as well, so keep in mind there. A lot of these other ones are pretty self-explanatory. Bills, Rams, Ravens, those offenses are all good. We expect them to have pretty good matchup advantages regardless of who they go up against. Definitely some brutal spots here, though, for the Jets, for the Panthers, the Browns. Great news for my Flacco versus Bryce decision. Neither of them are in good spots. The Giants and the Commanders as well, so maybe avoid starting players from those teams if you can help it. So moving on to the shadow matchups, digging into some wide receiver upgrades and downgrades. Starting off with the downgrades, some of the guys that are not in good matchups this week, we have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin versus the Saints secondary. Of course, we will not get our usual dose of Mike Evans versus Marshawn Lattimore because he is not going to play in this game, but nonetheless, Paulson Adebo and all the other guys there in the Saints secondary have been pretty good in general. So it's a matchup downgrade for Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. You're still probably starting both of those guys, especially Evans. Calvin Ridley sees a downgrade versus the Panthers secondary. They've been pretty strong this year. Definitely the type of team you want to run the ball against, not as much pass the ball against. DK Metcalf sees Joey Porter Jr., who has been outstanding ever since he's been asked to shadow cover the top receiver. The Steelers are allowing the sixth fewest wide receiver fantasy points allowed when deploying him as a shadow. So definitely bad news for DK Metcalf, a slight uptick for Tyler Lockett and for JSN. And then Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, if Jamar Chase is out, which I think he will be going up against L'Jarius Sneed from the Kansas City Chiefs. That will be shadow coverage as well. So not great news for Higgins, but if Chase ends up playing, that is good news for Higgins. So definitely monitor Chase's health there. DJ Moore expected to see AJ Terrell in shadow coverage, so bad news for him. And then Amari Cooper expected to see Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. Doesn't really matter. They don't shadow Sauce Gardner. But regardless, Amari Cooper is not in a good spot. He's actually coming into this game banged up and might not even play at all. So despite that monster game he gave for you in Week 16, not in a great spot in Week 17. And just because he had that big game, I wouldn't force him into your lineup. If you got a better guy that projects well, wipe the slate clean. What did they do last week? Doesn't matter. What matters is what they do in Week 17. And Amari Cooper projecting more as like a wide receiver 2-3 type than the wide receiver 1 overall performance on the week that he gave you last week. So yellow matchups, just one of them here. We have Drake London versus Tyreek Stevenson. The reason it's a yellow matchup is because the Bears are generally very good against wide receivers, but Tyreek Stevenson specifically, who is the primary matchup aligned across from Drake London 56% of the time, is bottom 3 in fantasy points per route covered. So Drake London is the only guy on the field with a good matchup on the outside. And of course, Drake London is their best receiver. So that bodes well for him on the outside. I think he's a pretty solid start this week. And then we also have some matchup upgrades for the rest of these guys. So get excited if you have Nico Collins and Noah Brown. Titans secondary sucks. Get excited if you have Ayuk and Debo. Commanders secondary sucks. Jerry Jeudy goes up against Derwin James in the slot. So again, a bit of a sneakier deep cut here, but Derwin James is dead dead last in fantasy points allowed per route covered. So Jerry Jeudy as the main slot receiver could actually get some work done this week. CeeDee Lamb versus Brian Branch, again, also a very good matchup for him. Rashee Rice against the Bengals secondary. He's an every week starter. Marquise Brown, assuming he's healthy, has a good matchup against the Eagles, but he's so risky. I'm not really excited about starting him. Giants wide receivers, don't think anybody's starting them, but they do have a good matchup. If you're desperate, Wandale could be in play there for you. And then Devontae Adams versus Julius Brents, also a bottom 5 corner in terms of fantasy points allowed per route covered. So Devontae Adams in a pretty good bounce back spot this week after the dud in week 16. Quarterback matchups. We're going to go through quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends in depth here. You guys can see all of the quarterback matchups on the screen. Top quarterbacks that are in elite spots. I'm reading these in order of how I have them ranked. So if you have Jalen Hurts, he is my highest ranked quarterback this week. Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson, Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Fields, Matthew Stafford, and Kyler Murray. All of those quarterbacks that I just named have very good matchups, and I would start them in the order that I just read them off in. Best streaming options this week if you're digging a little bit deeper. CJ Stroud is the premier dude, assuming he's back, which it looks like he will be. Baker Mayfield, also a very good option. Same goes for Derek Carr, also a pretty good option in that same game against the Buccaneers. If you got to dig deep this week, meaning everybody that I just mentioned is like rostered, or you're in a dynasty league and you're trying to figure out your second superflex spot or whatever, Ryan Tannehill / Will Levis, whoever starts, Taylor Heineke, and as I talked about already, Bryce Young looking somewhat appealing. So if you got to dig really deep and get really disgusting this week, those are the types of guys that I would go after. Of course, Joe Flacco is going to be a popular streamer because of what he's done so far, but I am personally not excited about playing him this week against that Jets defense. It's also a Thursday night game. He might not have Amari Cooper. If he does have Cooper, he's banged up and he's got a terrible matchup. Not looking great for Joe Flacco despite the monster game last week. Temper expectations as well for some of these guys with bad matchups. Josh Allen, not a good matchup, but he's still a top 3 quarterback for me regardless. Tua Tagovailoa, not a good matchup against Baltimore, but he's still a back-end QB1 in my rankings. Jared Goff, Jordan Love, and Geno Smith all are in that quarterback 13 to 18 range where you don't have to start them necessarily, but if you don't have better options, they are okay, even though they have bad matchups. I would definitely start Kyler Murray, CJ Stroud, Matthew Stafford, and Baker Mayfield over the guys that I just mentioned. Goff, Jordan Love, and Geno Smith, and Tua Tagovailoa, even potentially with Murray, Stroud, and Stafford there. So that is the quarterback position. Let's move on to the running back position, and then we can kind of speed through wide receivers and tight ends. The running back spots that we have here, we have a smash spot for the fantasy god, Christian McCaffrey against the Commanders. He's going to go hog wild. RIP to those of you guys that play against him. Kyron Williams also in a great spot this week against the Giants. DeAndre Swift could run wild against the Cardinals. I have him as like a top 6 running back this week. Can't leave him on my bench as it currently stands. James Cook, Jonathan Taylor, Bijan Robinson, although Chicago has been better against the run recently. All of those guys close out like my top 10 running backs that have good matchups. And then with Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, and Austin Eckler, those guys are all inside my top 18 running backs. And of course, my rankings are down below in the pinned comment. Those guys should probably be in your lineups as well, given the good matchups. I would start those guys as well as the quarterback position in the order that I listed them. Lesser smash plays that are all in pretty good spots too is if you guys are digging a little bit deeper, Javonte Williams, Ty Chandler, Khalil Herbert, and Chuba Hubbard, all pretty solid flex plays if you guys need some help there. And then some of the studs that have tougher matchups, but you're still probably starting them. Alvin Kamara, Breece Hall, Rashad White, Jahmyr Gibbs, all those guys are inside my top 12 running backs. And then James Conner, Raheem Mostert, Saquon Barkley, and Zeke around that range as well. Just kind of depending on your options, maybe you could afford to sit them. If you're in a shallow league and you got a bunch of great options this week, a guy like James Conner, a guy like Raheem Mostert, a guy like Ezekiel Elliott, they don't need to make your lineup, although they are pretty solid top 20 running back projections regardless. The wide receiver position, I already touched on quite a bit with the shadow matchups, but adding to some of the shadow matchups that I already talked about, we have Chris Olave in a great spot versus Tampa Bay, Justin Jefferson / Jordan Addison if he plays, also in a very good spot against Green Bay. Then we have DeAndre Hopkins facing the defense that Amari Cooper just decimated in the Houston Texans, and then Zay Flowers also in a good matchup, high-scoring game environment versus the Miami Dolphins. So those guys, in addition to all the wide receiver cornerback matchups I broke down in the shadow section, all very, very solid plays. If you got to dig a little bit deeper this week, I think the Packers wide receivers, depending on who's healthy, the Giants wide receivers, if you're digging really deep, and the Panthers wide receivers, if you're digging really deep, are in pretty decent spots, and that's a little bit more fuel to my Bryce Young take here. Consider streaming some of the wide receivers from those teams if you're in desperate need of help for your fantasy championship matchup. Maybe you suffered some injuries or whatever. We have some brutal matchups, though, for Garrett Wilson, for Amari Cooper, for Amon-Ra St. Brown, although he's still in your lineup. The Dolphins wide receivers, although they're still in your lineup. Commanders wide receivers, not necessarily must-start guys. The Bills wide receivers, although Diggs definitely is still in your lineup. And everyone I mentioned in the shadow section, DJ Moore, T. Higgins, those type of dudes. Some tough matchups this week. Hopefully you fall on the side of having a lot of good matchups this week in your championship matchup. Consider sitting or tempering expectations for some of the guys that I just mentioned, although most of them are every week starters. You just have to temper expectations for them. The tight end position, smash spot for a lot of the top tight ends this week. We have Kelsey in a great spot, McBride in a great spot, Sam Laporta in a great spot. Those guys are the top of the position for me this week. Then we have some more like fringe options in that mid tight end one, low end tight end one range. Dallas Goedert, Isaiah Likely, Cole Kmet, Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, Gerald Everett, and Pat Freiermuth. That is the order I would play those guys in. They are all in very good spots inside my top 16 tight ends for the week. Consider sitting guys like Dalton Kincaid, who's had a couple duds in a row now. Tucker Kraft, who's been solid but has a tough matchup. Dalton Schultz, also a really tough matchup, although CJ Stroud is back. And then definitely sit guys like Logan Thomas, Noah Fant, Tyler Higbee, and Cade Otton this week. So that is all the regular positions. Finally, we get to close out the final Matchups That Matter video of the fantasy football season in 2023. Shout out to you guys if you've watched every single one. You're the real MVP. Leave a like and a comment down below if you did. The best defenses to go after this week, if you guys play in defensive leagues, are the Browns and 49ers. They're the cream of the crop. They are the best options this week. The Bills, the Bears, the Rams, the Eagles, the Jets, and the Colts are the order I have all of my defenses ranked after the Browns and the 49ers. So if you can go and pick up the Bills defense versus the Patriots, they're my third ranked defense. Bears defense versus the Falcons, they're my fourth ranked defense, so on and so forth. Definitely go and target some of those defenses. And for kickers, I mean, just target teams with high implied point totals, target good kickers. You kind of know the drill at this point. So again, if you've watched every single one of these videos this year, leave me a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Good luck in your fantasy championship matchups. Make sure that once you guys are done, once week 17 is over, we're getting right into the Dynasty content. If you've never played in a Dynasty League, we'll be doing some listener startups this year, and we also have plenty of people in our Discord via flockfantasy.com who are always looking to join startups, so definitely check out the site, check out all the Dynasty stuff we have going on already. The Dynasty Land guys dropped a way too early draft guide. Me and Danny dropped our top 5 pass catcher and our top 5 quarterback rankings already. Going to go through pass catchers 6 to 10 later on this week or early next week. We're going to have Dynasty decisions going fast and furious, mock draft reactions going fast and furious. The fantasy football season does not end in week 17 for us because we're degenerates. I'm sure you guys watching this video are a degenerate as well, and you're going to want to keep it tapped right here. Stick around with the Fantasy Stock Exchange. We will have you covered in the Dynasty offseason, in the redraft season, whatever you guys need. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.